used as much as intuition.
Yeah.
But if you look at, on the basic assumptions, the fourth one down is consciousness of consciousness.
Oh, okay.
So that idea of direct intuition.
Yeah.
Another way to put that would be the third eye and the dimension approach and focusing, your conscious attention in these various ways is an intuitive activity. I think for some people that would sort of help them. It seems like it's more common people have this understanding of intuition kind of coming from some other place than their intellect.
Right. There's a feeling that it's a feeling.
Yeah.
An intuition about intuition.
Right.
I think that would be worth talking about, because I think the one way which we've talked about a little bit is that with consciousness, with the work you're doing via the conscious mind, or focusing conscious attention, that there's some aspect to it. Part of you is taking a passenger seat to what's going on.
Yeah.
Part of you is just the narrator for what's happening intuitively. So I think that would be worth talking more about. Just like you said, for people to begin to differentiate, you spent, was it 9 months or trying to differentiate consciousness from ego mind.
Yeah.
So we should just do that, right? Try to describe different ways that the experience is different. I think one of them is that it's just like being at the edge, right? Or being it's a different experience.
I mean, it's important to whether you think these assumptions are true or accurate or something. It's important to know what the assumptions are in order to know what the hell someone's talking about, right? And so it would be, if anyone was really going to try to understand the dimension approach, they would need to understand these assumptions.
Okay.
And then have those assumptions in their head, in order for something to make sense. It's kind of like if you assume the earth is flat, and I'm talking about a process but my assumption is that the earth is round. It's like, well, there's going to be confusion. Right.
Right.
And obviously that plays into anything.
If your frame of reference is gone, if your kind of operating premise isn't the same, or you don't understand what the operating premise is, a lot of it's going to sound, it could be nonsensical, but it could definitely seem like you're opposing something, or it's like knowing what you agree with, right?
Yeah.
And then this is what's coming out of that.
Yeah.
So I think it's a worthwhile thing to define.
And it seems so obvious, but I think it's so common that people aren't coming from the same initial premise or assumption. And it certainly plays into awakening, healing, development, and performance, in that what I noticed in the work I do is the quote unquote problem typically led back to the sort of the ground zero that their ego mind was looking from, right? The particular stance, the particular dimension, the particular, assumption they had. And then they're trying to solve this problem. And it's like, well, the problem, and it comes back to the problem is you, meaning the problem is what you think is you and the place you're looking from. So you can't see that that's the problem because that's how the ego works, right?
You're not wired that way yet.
Right. So but to finally get that and allow for that is huge, because then okay, your whole frame of reference changes, and it becomes, how do I get a clearer look at where it is I'm coming from energetically, as far as my perspective, as far as my awareness, as far as what I think is self. And it's not just conceptually, right? It's this literal thing that, again, like you said, we're not really wired. The ego is not wired that way initially. One example that I use a lot is your eyes are supposed to dilate, or I always try to figure what's the opposite of dilate. Undilate.
I don't know.
Get smaller.
Constrict, contract.
Yeah, maybe. But so your eyes are supposed to do that to respond to the intensity of light, right? But if your eyes were stuck dilated, you're just going to go around the world like constantly complaining about it being too bright most of the time.
Yeah.
And it's that thing where it's like it's it's not that it's too bright, especially if in situations where no one else in the room is thinking it's too bright, right?
Right.
Or that idea that for he who wears sandals, all the world is paved in leather. It's that sort of that same concept, right? That for better or for worse, we have these assumptions and these stances, and then we just color everything from there,
Right.
as though that was primary. And of course, the idea is no, consciousness is primary. Any ego stance that you have is not primary, but you can contextualize something.
Yeah. You have to start to look at what those stances are.
Yeah.
Ideally.
Right.
Just like if you've worn shoes your whole life and you don't even know you're wearing shoes.
Yeah.
I think that's a good example, what you're saying. That's how ingrained it is.
Right.
And why it takes like trauma sometimes to realize it, right? Like if you've worn shoes your whole life and you lose a foot, it's going to bring new awareness to
right.
how you interact with the pavement.
Yeah. And if you've worn shoes all your life and someone steals your shoes.
Right.
Right. Like,
so even less dramatic.
Yeah. We don't have to get all violent about it.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
We can start talking about shoe privilege.
It's for real though. I grew up in the South, and you're always getting accused of not having shoes. So
yeah,
let's assume we're all.
Do they have shoes down there?
Exactly. All you Yankees have these assumptions.
But if we suddenly have to like walk barefoot across the street, we're just like whiny babies.
Not going.
Yeah.
Could be anything on that street.
Right.
I think with I'm looking at these assumptions, because the other way I was thinking about these, like it would be good to, like you said, it'd be good to understand what your assumptions are. But it's also, when I read them, they're kind of explanations for your reasoning. So it's not, you're kind of already speaking to these indirectly when you describe something.
Mm-hmm.
But then this is kind of like what the operating premise is.
Yeah.
So I thought it was kind of neat to see that.
Per our earlier conversation, I'm really just ripping these things off. And
yeah, no, yeah, but like it's somebody else's words, like you said, but like it's
But I mean, and then creating this thing called the dimension approach, which is really just
you're going all the way, just ripping all of it off.
Yeah.
No, but this is you didn't invent any of these terms.
No.
But the approach is based on these ideas. And it's also just I think partially that's reassuring though. I don't think you'd want to like invent everything.
Yeah, right.
I think that's unless you wanted to have to redo it even more times than you already have.
Yeah. Yeah, if you invent every part of it, it's going to be at least 1,000 years before it, ever like gets accepted by the...
Right. And if you think you've invented all of it, you're probably delusional.
Yeah. Should we just go through them?
Yeah, why don't we just kind of like talk about them?
So this will be one of those where we'll say, yeah, in this episode, we'll go through these and then we'll get through like one.
Yeah, and then it won't be on the website by the time people hear the episode. The first one's a good one. Consciousness is the ground of existence. So what would you say people think is usually the ground of existence?
Conceptually, they'd say something different, but the way they operate is they would say the ground of existence is their mind.
Hmm. But that's an evolution in itself, though, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, I think it's back to... Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's seeing mind as object, anyway.
Yeah, that thing where, like, you could talk about that it used to be the gods, and then it was Rome, or whatever. It was the Serpent King or the whatever.
The state.
Yes, the state, and then the whole Nietzsche saying God is dead. It's like was speaking to this shift where the ground of existence, the ground of authority, the ground of meaning, the ground of purpose, the ground of truth is no longer God. Everyone is operating now as though the ground of all those things is themselves, what they think, what they feel. And as I've said before, my understanding is Nietzsche was saying, okay, he wasn't saying we need to get back to God. He was saying that's a good thing, except then we're doing this false superficial ego thing. We're not going deeper towards the actual truth that's deep in there. We're just getting hung up on on this conceptual level with regard to what we think it is to be good or something. But so I think it's that important thing that my understanding is he wasn't lamenting the death of God. He was seeing it as an evolutionary process, like you said, that it's similar to the child at some point needs to have their parents stop being God, and they need to start looking to themselves, right?
Right.
With regard to, well, what do I actually think? What do I actually feel? What do I actually want for my life versus what do my parents want for my life? And that's a developmental step forward.
Right.
Much to the dismay of the parents.
And God.
And God. But that's sort of it, right? It's like it's like if we're going to develop, we have to betray God, we have to betray our parents, and then eventually, if we're going to work through our ego, we have to betray ourselves, which is a huge stumbling block that people come up against. When you hit this wall where it's like, okay, the next step that you got to take is literally a betrayal of what you regard as self, and you got to leave behind everyone you care about. Because if you're going to have an ego death, it means you're going to abandon your kids, you're going to abandon your friends, your parents, your lover. So
there's whole cultures built around that process, right? I mean, that's the kind of the Indian Hindu stages of life concept that you are, that's like later in life, that's what you do. Or it's an option to people who find themselves needing to experience that ego death you're talking about.
Yeah.
And that's rooted in the fact that consciousness is the ground of existence and not any of those structures.
Right.
I mean, that's part of it. Consciousness is the ground of existence as far as that developmental trajectory or arc. I'm trying to remember how it's described, but it's related to kind of like pre-trans understanding, and that the landing point of that process sometimes resembles the origin in a way that's confusing to people because consciousness is ground. And we seem to move away from it and back towards it.
Yeah. At each level, you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Last time when we were talking about conscious contact and arriving in a place where you have contact happening between two people, and then if you go deeper into that, you start to recognize that experience of one mind or one consciousness looking just through two different perspectives. It's simultaneously, for example, your consciousness and my consciousness contacting each other. But when you go further or deeper, it's not your consciousness or my consciousness, it's the consciousness.
Right.
And if you go into that state, if you can, if your ego doesn't prevent you from going into that state, there's that oneness state of, and the recognition that, consciousness is the ground.
It's just buried in there. It's very deep. You've got to dig a long time. But then it's like you dig through the center of the earth and come back out on the earth, or just the interconnectedness or the motivations of the ego to separate you from that or to prevent experiencing that for fear of loss of control and loss of identity.
Yeah, and death and annihilation and eternity in hell, which are the kind of the standard things that come up, right?
Yeah. I guess in that, like, contact, like, what action comes out of that?
How do you mean?
I guess, like, in the experience as consciousness, I guess, we got to contact, and it's like, where does it go from there? Right?
Oh.
Like, what happens?
I mean,
just go to the next place where you don't have consciousness.
Right. I mean, my understanding and the teeny little bit that I might have actually experienced a taste of it is there's bliss, right? There's this oneness bliss experience, and then questions like you just asked don't arise, which means you're obviously not there.
To be clear, you're not in touch with it right now. It's the most undercutting.
But I'll come back out of it to answer your question.
Yeah, right.
But seriously, I think that's it. You know, it's a leaving the mind behind. If you were gonna do that, and then it's a, you know, so then the answer really from the mind is like, who knows? It's a mystery. Because from there, consciousness takes over. You know, it's like an airplane taking off from the ground. It's like once those tires leave the ground, you can't measure from the ground anymore. Right? It's there's this experience that's going on up in the air, and the mind is the ego mind certainly is just left going, oh, I don't know. It leaves the atmosphere.
Right.
And there's people who, and teachings and systems that are about spiritual worlds and stuff. I don't have a sense of that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying there aren't. I'm just saying I don't. I'll talk about chakras and stuff like that and conscious mind because that's something I experience directly. But I go as far as consciousness, and then I don't know what's past there.
Me neither. Fleeting experiences of consciousness seems to be more than enough.
Yeah.
But no, I think that's a fair answer. The transpersonal view of consciousness that you have here is it that consciousness acts through all those different realms? And is that what that's kind of pointing to? That there's, as you said, there are non-physical realms in which we exist as much or more than in the realm of the senses and physical world. Because I guess I wouldn't even think of consciousness as, is that just saying that consciousness impacts all realms that you're talking about? As far as gross, subtle, imaginal.
I think the point there is that transpersonal versus personal is like the important part of it, right? So if you say sort of your standard view of consciousness is that it's this personal thing, that we are conscious in a personal way only, as opposed to your consciousness transcending the personal perspective, and so not just conceptually. You know, like right now, an analogy, although it's a little bit more than an analogy, but if you and I are going to talk about, you're in California, I'm in Minnesota, if we're going to talk about Russia right now, or Mars, or it doesn't have to be that far away, it can be anywhere where we're not, right? But if we're going to talk about it, Ohio. we're gonna have this conceptual idea in our head about it, and we could get into more detail as far as, okay, are you just coming from some premises, or can you actually open your mind and have an open conversation about Ohio and listen to stuff I have to say about Ohio and blah blah blah. But that's different than can our consciousness leave, you know, the rooms that we're sitting in and go and be in Ohio right now and be directly witnessing, for example, something going on in Ohio. And most people would say, well, of course not, that's ridiculous. But the idea with the transpersonal view is that that's only, the idea would be, of course we can't on the personal level, but on a transpersonal level you can, right? Because it's saying that there are these realms. Again, we're using this horizontal example, right? Ohio would be horizontal from Mississippi, or not from Mississippi, but from California and Minnesota.
Yeah. Do you want to go back to Mars?
Mississippi also.
Yeah. Do you want to go back to Mars?
Yeah. Yeah, Mars is better. Yeah, and if you said Mars was a vertical. But so the idea that consciousness exists outside of, it's kind of like if you take the next one, the transmissive theory of consciousness, right? That consciousness is existence, right? Consciousness is what we are, not our brain. And that consciousness can act and exist and even be experienced not simply from the personal perspective.
I think it's a big distinction between like prevailing understanding of the term consciousness, and that consciousness is usually understood as like something that's just a unique development to human brains versus other animals.
Yeah.
That consciousness is a term used for the fact that we think about how we think and we talk about how we think, or it's a conceptual term more than a ground of all existence. So both of those, you're saying the transpersonal and transmissive, is to emphasize that it's not a unique experience, in that it's not a specific to one person in their individual realms, that it's operating through those.
Yeah. Let me try an example that I'm just making up right now. So to go back to the computer stuff, the ego mind is like your hard drive, right? So you've got this computer, let's say this laptop that you're using. And then I've talked about that consciousness is more like the internet, right? But people think self is the ego, and I'm saying self is actually the internet. And then you could say, okay, but if you're talking about a transpersonal experience of consciousness, then we're saying there's some kind of individual identity that's like going beyond the hard drive and having some experience, right? And it's like, well, wait, what are you talking about? How's the hard drive going to go somewhere? And then it's like, well, the hard drive isn't really the identity. And then you could say that, for example, you can have some online identity, right? And your online identity then could go and log in somewhere and have some experience. And it'd be like, well, wait, how, who is that right now that's logging in? It's like, oh, that's Jeff Blanton. He's logging into this right now. And now he's directly experiencing this, webinar or this whatever. And if you thought, well, his hard drive isn't traveling through space to where this event's going on. It's that his online identity, so to speak, traveled there or is hooking into there. And so again, just like with computers, if it was 19 whatever, depending on how into computers you were, let's say in 1980, most people, if I was explaining the internet and I was explaining how it worked, and then I was saying, and then you'll have this online identity, and then you'll be able to log in, and it'd just be like, what the hell are you talking about, right? It'd be hard to even really conceptualize it, and it would sound fantastical. Yeah. But I think it applies to this idea with our consciousness that the truth is, the analogy of, let's say, your online identity that can go around and log into stuff, that's actually a more real identity than your hard drive is, meaning ontologically. That the ego mind is more like your hard drive. It just sits there in your head, and has its programs, but it's your online identity that's much more sophisticated and capable of all these other types of experience, and in bringing those energies or those experiences, in fact, back down in and through your hard drive, right? And so you sit there with your head, your body, your head, your brain, and you're literally going out there just like with a computer, and you're bringing in this information to have it show up on your mind screen. And then the question is, okay, but what's the identity? Well, the identity is not what's showing up on your mind screen. The identity is not the hard drive. The identity is not the actual, keyboard and screen, right? If the keyboard and screen was body, right, analogous to body, the hard drive was analogous to your ego mind, and what's showing up on your screen was analogous to your mind screen. It's like, okay, but none of those are your actual online identity. And in the computer world, your actual online identity is far more important than
what you view it with,
the laptop or any of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, as we know, it's like we can do screen sharing, and you can go use someone else's computer and log in. And all that stuff kind of applies. And it's true whenever anyone does it, but if I'm empathizing and bringing my attention to what's going on with you, it's like I'm doing a screen share.
One of those conscious experiences you're talking about.
Yeah. My ego mind can't do a screen share. Only my conscious mind can.
That's a good call out.
My ego mind can just project and then say it's doing a screen share.
It's like sympathy.
Right.
I think that's a good distinction because when you've actually empathized with someone and when you haven't, often by like their reaction, but also with your internal state, like you're describing that actually screen sharing means you're going to feel what they're feeling. But that analogy and that experience makes sense.
Because it's so often that we think we're screen sharing with someone, but you're looking at your screen and you're going, do you see the whatever? And they're going, no, I don't. And you're going, well, then you're a fucking idiot. But the truth is that's actually not showing up on their screen,
Right.
Like we don't remember that like the other person's not working with the same screen we're working with.
It's hard. Just like flashback to everyone I've been impatient with at work. Like, oh, it's a different screen. We're sitting in front of literally different screens, operating with different mental screens.
Yeah.
While we work from home all day.
Right. And the narcissist says, everyone just needs to fucking share my screen.
That's rude, Lance.
And then I don't know what weird stuff you got going on your screen, but do a screen share with me.
Yeah.
But I mean, if we really push the analogy, I mean, there's some truth to that with conscious transmission as well, where it's like, listen, if you just screen share with me for a minute, like just take a look at my screen, which of course the ego has resistance to, and it's like you don't have to adopt my screen for the rest of your life, but will you just take a look at it for a second? So is the transpersonal view perfectly clear now?
I think so. No,
I think for the I hesitate to say for the beginner. Sounds so.
Yeah, don't.
Yeah.
The dimension approach cult initiate.
Yeah, right.
Hasn't gotten the red sash yet.
I think the analogy of being online or not, right? This idea that up until 30 years ago, none of us knew what online meant, right? We just had computers were just hard drives.
Right.
And so now we're all aware of this internet thing and of being online and Wi-Fi and satellite, blah, blah, blah. And that's just a really good analogy of transpersonal versus personal. People who didn't think it was possible for there to be computer experience that goes outside of your computer, would say, no, there's no such thing as trans. But so just when it's saying the transpersonal view of consciousness, it's making that point that an individual person can go into a mode where they are experiencing and deriving information beyond the personal mechanisms in their mind.
If you want to learn more about the Dimension Approach, please visit dimensionapproach.com.
I was watching a YouTube video on a bunch of songs that the Beatles copied.
Nice.
I was enjoying that.
I was really, really enjoying it. Maybe too much. Any big ones? What was the?
I mean, I don't even know their songs enough to.
Wow, that's some next level disdain, Lance. I only know enough to bring up a story kind of abstractly that puts them down, but not enough to know the details of the story. It's kind of a karmic cycle because then all their music got ripped off too. So
Yeah.
what are you going to do?
What was, what they did keep saying on there was that the Beatles were not hiding it at all. They totally were saying like, yeah, we heard this and then we used that, and tweaked it slightly.
For sure. The Stones too, like talked a lot about that. Like they all just talked about all of especially the Stones, like the Mississippi blues artist that they copied.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just like, yeah, we took this, like we love it. You should go listen to it.
Yeah.
It's just kind of it's like for them anyways, like an homage thing. It was really more, just stylistically, but that's funny.
That brings to mind a couple of quotes that I think are kind of a neat progression. I saw an interview where Keith Richards said, I never played a riff that I didn't rip off from Chuck Berry.
Yeah, right.
And then I've also seen Chuck Berry say, Elvis was the greatest there ever was and the greatest there ever will be.
So funny.
Isn't it?
Yeah. Just some nice guys. Just saying nice things about each other.
Yeah. I don't know if going from talking about the dimension approach to talking about like Elvis and B.B. King is a digression, but
is it? Yeah, right. Music's about intuition.
we should say, but we transcend. Let us get back to.
Honestly, I liked that. I thought that was funny, and I guess we'll have to find out if anybody else thinks it's funny.
Yeah, right.
I thought that was pretty funny.